Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Welcome to episode 32 of Non-Monogamy Help. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll either be read in the podcast or the column anonymously. If you want to read the columns and listen to the podcast, you can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com, subscribe to our newsletter by going to go.nonmonogamyhelp.com/email, and follow us on Twitter at nonmonogamyhelp. If you want to support the columns on the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month can help support the daily running of the columns and the podcast, and it shows a general vote of support, which I really appreciate. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix. If you donate $5 or more a month, your name, with your permission, will be read at the end of the podcast. Let's get to this week's discussion question. If this is the first time you're hearing this, every week before I read the letter, I put forth a discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, metamors, anyone else to get to know them a little bit more, blah, blah, blah. I'll also answer it myself briefly to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is, what are you a little addicted to? And the examples that it gave are porn, alcohol, shopping, and arguing. And I think that it's really funny that it says arguing, because I think that's probably what I'm actually a little bit addicted to. But I think I've gotten really a lot better with it. Like, I think I used to feel really intense about having the last word, and I think the upside is that I'm really good at arguing now in a way that's kind of scary, but I don't think it's very good for me. And actually the best thing that I've really been able to learn is when to just step away. Like, there have been times when I've put forth something and someone's like responded with this massive paragraph and I've just been able to go, nope, not gonna engage. And I've saved so much energy in my life because of that. So that's really great. Anyway, so yeah, that's probably what I'm still a little bit addictive to. Like, occasionally I'll still be pulled into a ridiculous argument that I really should just back away from. So I'm probably a little bit addicted to arguing. That's me. So yeah, I'll repeat the discussion question again before we get to our letter. The discussion question is, what are you a little addicted to? Now let's get to this week's letter. I'm a 45-year-old woman and have been married for 23 years. We started our relationship very young and decided to be monogamous. I use quotation marks because at the time we really didn't know better. We didn't really discuss openly different relationship styles. We didn't know about long-term relationships at all. We have 2 kids, ages 7 and 10. My husband has been a good guy, but over the last years, I've lost desire, and he also stopped finding joy in life, and would focus on family and life's constraints, including allowing codependency with his mother, etc. He became the no we can't guy. After having been raised thinking that infidelity is an absolute wrong, lo and behold, I fell deeply in love with Guy at Work. This was a person who had helped me grow tremendously professionally and personally. He helped me become self-confident and aware of different ways of loving, living, and giving. I was not looking to fall in love with anybody, but found myself with deep feelings for this guy. I learned he felt the same way, and without much foresight, I gave myself into this new relationship, which lasted about 8 months, even though we both developed our feelings over many years of working together. It became so intense that for me to be honest with myself, I decided to stop the relationship and think about what I really wanted in life. I also didn't want to do this behind my husband's back. Initially, I thought the issues I had with my husband were the source of my falling in love with someone else. As I progressed in therapy and reading and listening to podcasts, I realized that while my relationship with my husband could and should be improved, my feelings for a guy at work were independent, and that I would like to try consensual non-monogamy. About a month into couples therapy, I disclosed my affair. I don't think I did it in the best way, and I'm not sure how I could have had the wisdom to do it in a better way, but I wanted us to work through the reality of our situation and felt I needed to be upfront with him. In essence, I told him I developed feelings for another person, that I still loved him, and that I wanted to explore an open relationship. He immediately went home to the computer and found a lot of my communications with Guy at Work. This hurt him immensely, because he learned a lot of details that I believe have damaged him psychologically. My husband entered into a phase of righteousness about my affair. We started the slow process of building trust. I stopped all communications with Guy at Work, and I have not spoken to him at all in the last 6 months. The problem is that I really don't see myself going back to monogamy. Neither does my husband, but he has put put as a condition that guy at work is off limits, but he is the one I love and that I want to have an additional relationship with. I feel it is a very deep need, and one that if my husband does not allow would just be devastating to me. I also don't believe that my husband should be able to control who I see. Although I believe that mutual non-monogamy is based on mutual consent, I don't believe he has the right to veto who I love. I believe that ultimately we are on this earth to build meaningful connections and contribute to other people's lives, and I don't want my husband controlling that. That said, I want to go through this process in a very careful and respectful way. I know that reading all of our texts was scarring to him, and even though he sees a benefits offer of an open relationship, he has told me that guy at work is off limits. By the way, neither he nor I work in the same place anymore. I would like to work with my husband and help him get through the trauma that he has suffered. I have a few questions. The first one is whether it is possible to successfully open a marriage after an affair has been disclosed, a deeply hurtful one for one of the partners. Second, will my husband be able to ever get over my feelings for guy at work? He doesn't even live in the same state, so it would be a long-distance relationship if anything. I should also add that even though I deeply love my husband and I find him attractive, I don't desire him. He's a good-looking guy, but I don't feel I want to have sex with him. I can do this occasionally if we have had the right level of affection, but that is something we're still working through, and I find myself not desiring to have sex with him as often. I am okay with that. I would really appreciate your advice. Seems that most of the talk on open relationships is for 20-somethings, but many of us in our 40s need it as well. Thank you so much. A few things here. The first question you ask is it possible to open a relationship successfully after an affair? Yes, it is possible, but with some real big caveats here. It is very, very rare for a person or a couple that is already in an established monogamous relationship for both of those people to decide to be non-monogamous at the same time. It's usually one person that comes up with the idea. Quite a lot of times, either that person has already cheated, sometimes they have developed an interest in someone, and that is someone that they want to pursue. Rarely is it the case that they just kind of discover that they want to be non-monogamous. Usually it's something that spurs them to it and encourages them to break that barrier. Even if they've considered it before, it's usually another person that they want to pursue that has caused them to decide to make the move to either ask for it or have an affair. I think that the things that make transitioning from an affair to a successful open relationship are, for one thing, owning the situation. It's hard for me to say, whether or not you're fully owning the situation. It sounds like you are. You admit that this was a really hard thing for your husband and that it's been psychologically damaging to him. However, there's one issue in the fact that immediately after you disclosed this affair, your partner went home to the computer and basically snooped. Snooping never really works out, and usually people snoop to find things that they don't know, and I find it really concerning that your husband decided to snoop when he already knew what he was going to find. That, coupled with the fact that you've said that he's kind of lost his, spark, that he's been quite on the negative side, that he's developed some codependency with his mother, these are, and that's kind of your definition, I don't know if that's actually been a therapist that said that, these are kind of really concerning things about him that I think he really needs to pursue with a therapist. And it sounds like you have a couples therapist, but I don't know if he is seeing a separate therapist, and I really think he needs to consider that, because that decision to decide to go and then look for information that he knew was going to be damaging to him is a really, really big red flag. And it doesn't sound like he actually apologized for violating your privacy, because that was a violation of your privacy. He shouldn't be allowed, even if you have cheated, that doesn't automatically give him access or rights to explore any bit of communications that you've had with someone else. So you really need to be able to own up to things and be really, really honest. And the fact that he's kind of been self-righteous about this, and that it doesn't sound like he's really sought help for this choice that he made, is kind of a big barrier to this. The second thing is kind of honesty. Committing to full honesty in the future is also a big thing. And it doesn't sound like you are, and I may be getting this wrong, but it doesn't sound like you've been honest with him about not desiring him anymore. Maybe because you saw his behavior when you actually disclosed the affair, and you don't really want to give him any more reasons to be depressed. But, did you explain that? Because you said you still love him and you still want to work on things, but you need to be honest about the fact that you don't desire him. the other kind of question that you had that kind of relates to what I'm going to continue to say about whether or not it's possible is it possible for your husband to get over his feelings? I think that obviously your husband is projecting and blaming the responsibility of this entire affair on this guy at work. That really isn't fair in a way. I mean, he has been really self-righteous with you, which has shown that he does blame you as well. I mean, it is equally your fault as well as this guy at work. I don't think it's completely unfair for him to not feel great about you being with guy at work, because even though you did have the affair and you decided to do that, this guy represents a lot of really negative things. And I don't know what he read in those messages that he shouldn't have read, but he's not going to be able to get that just out of his mind, which isn't your fault because he shouldn't have read that. But equally, like, I understand where you're coming from. You talk a lot about, mutual consent and mutual non-monogamy, and he doesn't have the right to veto. But at the same time, you didn't give him the chance to consent to a non-monogamous relationship. You had an affair. And at this point, he can't go back to the time before that affair. So you kind of removed his agency from the situation. It'd be one thing if you saw yourself developing feelings for this colleague and you approached your husband at that time and offered him the chance to either try an open relationship with you or go your separate ways. But you didn't give him that option. So now he's essentially forced into non-monogamy. Even if he can see some benefits out of it, he's been forced through your affair into this situation. And it's not really, if you think about it, you now being like, well, we need to have mutual consent and you can't veto who I want to be a part, I get that and I fully support that, but I don't really feel like this is a veto. I feel like this is a fair boundary given what he's been through. I think it's fair enough if you've had an affair for him to say, okay, I will do non-monogamy, but I really don't want it to be with this person. I honestly think that that's not really a veto. I think that that's the continuous circumstances by which he's willing to continue in this relationship with you. That's not really a veto. It's not as if you develop feelings for this guy and you were already in an open relationship with mutual consent and then he tried to take that away from you. You pursued this and you pursued it behind your husband's back, and now you didn't give him the chance for mutual consent then. And so I just feel like, it may not make a lot of sense, and I do really feel like he's projecting a lot of his feelings onto this guy and maybe blaming him a bit more than he needs to. But I think that given what's happened and given everything that he's been through, even if some of what he's been through is because he decided to violate your privacy, in a perfect world, yes, he doesn't get to control or veto any relationships, but you didn't give him the ability to consent to an open relationship. So I do kind of feel like it's a fair enough ask, or it's a fair enough boundary for him. And that's kind of what he's putting his cards on the table at this point. Because once you've kind of broken your initial relationship agreements, you're negotiating a new relationship agreement. And he has decided that, okay, non-monogamy is okay, but not with this person. And I think some people have boundaries like that, even without an affair. Some people I'm not cool with you dating my friends. A lot of people have very reasonable boundaries around you not dating family members. So this is now his boundary with regards to how he's going to move forward in this situation and be able to cope with this and still stay with you. And I think what you need to decide is whether or not you actually want non-monogamy or you just want to date this guy. And I mean, I think you really need to consider the fact that you haven't spoken to him for 6 months and he doesn't even live in the same state as you. I mean, for all you know, work guy could be in a monogamous relationship with someone else right now. Like, you may be building up all this and making all this kind of kerfuffle initially about this guy who you had this really intense connection with, but you haven't spoken to him in 6 months. So what you've communicated to guy at work is that he is not your first priority, and that he will be chucked if and when your husband is upset. He I don't know if he knew you were married, which also really, I understand you've learned a lot from this guy and he's been wonderful and awakened all kinds of things within you, but if he knew you were married and was willing to participate in infidelity with you, that's not consensual non-monogamy either. And so I would then question whether or not guy at work is able to participate in consensual non-monogamy, because he's already kind of illustrated that he's not willing to participate in something consensual. He's fine with it being non-consensual, which is a problem. And some people, unfortunately, are interested in cheating because it's exciting and it's secretive, but aren't really interested in legit, non-monogamous relationships. So I think that's something you need to think about, because you're putting all this on the line for someone who may not even be available to you right now. So, you have to decide whether or not this relationship is worth giving your husband up. And, I think, given the status of your relationship, like, I know you've been together for a long time, does he really want non-monogamy, or is he just doing this to keep you? You've been married for 23 years, that's a lot. You've got kids that aren't fully grown yet. But at the same time, you started this relationship when you were really young. You didn't really know what you wanted, now you know what you want. And I think you need to really sit down and ask yourself, is non-monogamy the thing you really want, or is it just that you like this relationship and you wanted it to continue? And ask yourself some real hard questions about, is it really going to continue now that you've had this big upset? Is it really going to be able to just pick up from where it's left off with this work guy? Because you haven't spoken to him in 6 months, you don't even know where he is right now, and whether or not he's with somebody else, or whether or not he's actually interested in a consensual non-monogamous relationship, or if he just liked the cheating. So there's a lot of things to really consider there. And to be fair, I don't think it's completely out of the ballpark and completely ridiculous for your husband to say, as a compromise, I will stay and I will do non-monogamy because I may get some potential benefits out of that, so I see the benefits to me in doing this, but I don't want you to pursue this guy you cheated on me with. I feel like that's a pretty fair ask in a way. It's a compromise, but you have to decide if it's a compromise you actually want to make and whether or not it's worth it for you, because ultimately that's what it kind of comes down to. There may be a time in the future, after the dust is settled and you've figured out a groove with non-monogamy and you figured out that you both want it and it's working for both of you, there may be a time when he's not so bothered about guy at work, but I don't think he can give you a time limit on that. I don't think he can realistically project when his feelings will be better. And I think because the onus is on you, you're the one that violated your agreement together. You're the one that lied. So you have to reestablish that trust with him. And maybe you deciding, okay, you know what, I won't see this guy. It seems unfair to you, but part of it may be that that's what he needs to reestablish trust with you. To know that you are actually going to give up something, because you haven't had to give up something. If you really think about it, you've had your cake and you've got to eat it too, in a way. You've had your really fun relationship with this work guy, and you've had your husband. He hasn't, he's now just figuring out that those 8 months, were a lie. And now he has to adjust to that. And now he has to figure out how to work out a new relationship. That his whole life has changed. And I don't think it's too much to ask for him to not want the person who was involved and knew about it. I'm guessing that guy at work knew that you were married, to not be a part of that. And I don't think that's too much to ask. So it really comes down to what you're willing to do. So yeah, to sum up, is it possible to go from an affair to a successful non-monogamous relationship? Yes, but with some serious caveats about people got to be really, really honest with one another. They got to own up to their shit. You have to be willing to own up on both sides to the mistakes that you've made, and you've got to, as I said, be honest about, the real situation. It doesn't sound like you've been fully honest with him about where your desire levels are, and maybe that's part of it. And is it possible for your husband to get over his feelings? Maybe, at some point down the future, but I think that considering you were the one that messed up here, you need to think about the fact that he is in a situation where his entire foundations are cracked, and you've got to rebuild that, as you said. And maybe part of rebuilding that is, you haven't spoken to him for 6 months, like I said. You've clearly already separated from him in a way. You've clearly already shown that. And I don't think it's fair to say, okay, I'll not see him for 2 years and then I'll go, you need to let your husband decide that. And I don't think it's completely out of the, ballpark of fair for him to decide to compromise by having an open relationship, but to say this person that you cheated with is off limits. I don't really see that as a veto power. I see that as his sort of putting his cards and boundaries on the table of like, all right, I will compromise on non-monogamy, but this is what I want. And I don't think that's the same as a veto. I think that's different. It may not be suitable for you. It may not be happy for you. It may not be what you want, but I don't think that's completely unfair. So ultimately, it's kind of in your ball. It's in your ballpark. I'm sorry. I shouldn't use sports metaphors when I don't know sports. It's up to you to decide whether or not those are terms you can agree with. And it comes down to, with the situation of lacking a desire for him, with his depression and the other, I don't know if he's depressed. It seems like he's got something going on he needs to work on with somebody. Is it something that you want to continue? Is it non-monogamy that you really want? Or is it just dating this other guy that you really wanted? Because if you decide non-monogamy is the thing you want and you can't make this agreement with your husband, you could easily decide to break up with your husband, go back, find a guy at work is dating somebody else. That's why you got to be really into non-monogamy and not just this guy at work, because if you go back, you got to be okay with the fact that if you go back to a guy at work and he's with somebody else and he's not interested, or, what have you, are you fine with that? Or are you actually, oh crap, I just want a guy at work? Yeah. So it's something for you to think about and pick through. But I hope it helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 32 of Non-Monogamy Help. If you want to be awesome, you can donate to our Patreon. Donating $5 or more a month, again, means that your name, with your permission, if you desire so, will be read at the end of the podcast. This week's current patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury, Jones, Juke, and James Wardtell. If for whatever reason you cannot become a patron because life happens, then if you can take 5 minutes to log into iTunes, find our podcast, and rate it and review it, that would be really, really helpful. It helps us get the podcast out to new people. If you don't want to write a review, you don't have to. You can just do a rating. That's also appreciated. So yeah, if you have 5 minutes to spare, please do that if you can. And that's all for this week. You'll get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our podcast music has been provided by Chris Albury Jones at albury-jones.com, and the art was made by Dom Jung at domduong.com. Thank you for listening.